Hi guys, how are you doing? Hope you're having a great day and you are all well and safe. I have been dabbling in Artset Pro again, and this time I've been painting with the pastels. First thing I need to do with this is get the background colour changed. I don't want a white background because I'm working in pastels. So there is a flood tool. You can see I've just selected that, and sort of using the colour wheel, floating around, looking for a colour that I think would be suitable to work on as a ground. So I'm sort of, as you can see, I'm experimenting. I'm just using that slider, moving it around, thinking, do I want a green? What about a warm colour? Should I go warm? So at this point, nothing's set in stone, and I choose a nice peachy colour, I guess. Change the layer, so I'm not going to work on that. It's interesting that it didn't fill the top right hand corner. I must have coloured that in some way with a marker pen, and I am using pastel brushes. Now, there's two sets of brushes in Artset Pro. There's pastel brushes and there are chalk brushes. And I went to pastels instinctively, but it appears, looking closer, that the pastel brushes they've got some oil pastels, which are a bit more like oil paints, and the chalks have got sort of chalky pastels in there, which makes total sense. I only used the pastel brushes, and I went through the brushes, and there was only two that I liked, and that's not saying that the other brushes are no good. By the way, I'm using the big pastel brush at the minute to get this sort of background colour on. I'm not saying that the other pastel brushes aren't any good, they just weren't giving me the effect I wanted. They were more oily, like you're using oil pastels. So maybe I should have a look at them differently. I've never really used oil pastels in as traditional media, so I'd have to probably get some and try them out as real paints or a real media first, so I can then kind of see if I can emulate them. But I'm going for a traditional chalk pastel look, but I'm using the pastels. I'm not using the chalk brushes. So like I say, I only use two brushes, and they both work really well. That's the big pastel and the flat pastel. I'm just getting the background colours on at the minute, so I'm not bothering about detail. I'm not even going to bother with the swans. You can see top left, by the way, that is the photo I'm using as reference for this. This was in it's not a lake. That's we had remember we had all those floods last year, and well, you will if you're in the UK. If you're anywhere else, you won't remember. But we had a lot of floods last year, and in fact, it was the beginning of this year. And it was just a children's play park, and one of the fields was just flooded, and all these swans were there and all these other birds. So I took a quick snap on my phone, and that's what I'm using for reference. So as you can see, I'm just getting in local colour over the whole of the canvas using this big pastel brush. So what can I say? Because I'm doing this voiceover after the painting, obviously. I did this one late Friday afternoon. One Friday afternoon. I did it in the studio, but I just wanted to get in the flow. I didn't want to do the recording of the audio. I just wanted to paint. So I'm doing the audio now. So I forgot what I was going to talk about. Oh yeah, the brushes. The brushes, what do I think to that? I mean, there's not a lot. There's only 4 or 5 brushes, and there's only 2 that I liked that were pastel brushes. That was the big pastel and the flat pastel. But like I say, I didn't try the chalks. So how does that compare to other apps? I would say lacking. Certainly, if you go into the desktop and you use Critter, Digital Atelier, Pastel Brushes are just streets ahead of this. And there's a lot more choices in Procreate, say. Artrage 2, I've looked at pastel drawings I've done in Artrage, and they seem to have a better range. But having said all of that, the proof of the pudding is in the eating. So you really need to stay to the end of the video to see the actual finished pastel drawing. Do you think it does justice? Because to be honest, you know, as you know, I do lots of paintings using just one brush. So you don't, just because an app hasn't got 7 or 8 or 20 brushes doesn't mean it's not adequate. It does blow out the water iPastel, by the way. It's way ahead of that. And it does feel, you know, quite organic. It doesn't feel as though you are using something that isn't really up to the job. It did feel quite natural. The brushes that I used were really good. This big pastel that I'm using now, you can see it's like a big soft pastel that doesn't really give you defined shapes so much, but that comes in with the flat pastel. So I was able to get all the effects I wanted just with those 2 brushes, really. So I'll start off, you can see I've actually got different kind of colours going off. I've got these greens at the bottom, greys in the middle, and this browny, dark brown colour at the top. So it's all, at the minute, it's all a little bit ununified, and it stays that way for quite a long while. But I am conscious of it, that I've got these bands, and that's okay, I guess, but that's not how I normally work. So bear that in mind, that I've got these different colours going off, i.e. the bands of colours that I am going to want to work with. And what I'll be doing, I'll just bring in colours from the foreground into those trees later on. I've just noticed, I said I only use 2 brushes. That's not strictly true. I'm using the flat edge print brush now to sketch in these tree trunks, which is quite a nice brush, but I didn't use it a lot. In fact, I may have used it more than on these trees, but as far as I can remember, I just used it on those trees. And you can see it does give a nice textured look, not as sort of neat as using the flat edge print, which I'll use in a while, but it does give you this sort of organic looking shape, which is another nice brush. So I stand corrected. There's 3 brushes that I liked in this selection. I'll just go over them again: the big pastel brush, the flat pastel brush, and the flat edge print. So I'm just going to speed this up a little bit now, because this is a long painting, and I don't want the video to be too long. I shan't be speeding it up for too many seconds though, because we're coming up to doing the swans in a minute or 2. So this is just a short fast forward really. And what I'm doing, I'm just adding a little bit more detail and a little bit of over painting onto the initial ground, getting in some of those shadows that you can see in the water, bringing some of that warm red colour into the water as well. Right, so I'm creating a new layer now for the swan. You can see I'd already created a second layer or a third layer for that over painting. I'm now going to create a new layer to put this swan on, because I may want to move them around a little bit, or I may want to just adjust the size as I'm painting. So I merged the two layers for the background down into one layer. I've got a new layer to start painting. And notice I'm using the wheel palette for this painting. I feel much comfier using the wheel palette. I think it's because you move across different apps and it's always the same. Whereas if you're using their custom palettes and things, you have to familiarize yourself with every palette for every different app. So I think I just feel comfier using the wheel. So that's why I'm using the wheel on this one. You can see I've got a sort of a neutral grey to start off with. And I've got it in my head that these swans are going to be really full of colour. They're not going to be just grey. So I'm going to put yellows in there and pinks and blues and just hit them with lots of colour, but not primary colours. I'm talking pastels really. So greyed off muted colours, and then maybe the odd hint of a much more saturated hue in the odd little place, but mostly very subtle subdued colours. So I'm just sort of sculpting away this swan shape. Zoomed in a little bit there. It's unusual for me. And now I'm using the flat pastel brush. So this is the brush that I pretty much stick with for most of the painting. I do flip backwards and forwards a little bit, but mostly I'm working with this flat pastel brush, which I found perfect for the effect that I want to get. And of course, I'm not going to endeavour to capture these swans and render them exactly the same as the photograph. There's no real need for that for what I'm doing. I want to achieve an impression of a swan, because this is an impressionistic piece. And the beautiful thing about working on a separate layer, you can see I can sculpt away and use the eraser to lift out areas or change a lighter colour. I'm using the colour picker to pick the background colour up, and then just sort of paint negative shapes around my swan as well. So it's it gives you a lot of flexibility to work on a separate layer, and the ability to move things around as well. So I generally do that. If you've watched many of my videos, you'll know that when I'm doing the main feature or something that's sort of set in a scene, I put it on a different layer so I can just tweak it a little bit, move it around, and generally have a lot more control of it. The other thing I was thinking about a lot while I was doing this was I was wondering how many swans was I going to paint. Was I going to paint 5 swans? Just 2? Am I going to put those other little birds in? Not so sure what I was going to do at this point. I really was in a quandary. I knew I was going to do at least 2. I wasn't just going to do 1. I want to do the 2 swans that are in the foreground, and I stay with that idea, wondering, well, stay with that idea, I mean, I hadn't selected to do just 2 swans or 3 or 4. I was still contemplating how many swans I was going to put into this. So at this point, I still don't really know. I may do a lot more. I'm using a smudge, one of the smudge brushes. I think it's a paper smudge, just to soften off a few edges there. And I do use that quite a lot, just to break up edges now and again, which gives you the impression as though you smudge that pastel with your finger, which I thought was a very realistic looking effect. So again, I am going to fast forward this a little bit to get some more of the swans in, and I'll be back shortly. Here's an example of me using the cut tool to trace around that smaller swan. It's way too small, so you can see I'm tracing around that, and then I can use my fingers to just enlarge it slightly, make it bigger, and reposition it to exactly the right size. So that this is a really good example of why I sort of paint main features, figures, and animals and things like of that nature, or little houses set in a landscape on a different layer, so I can get in there and fine tune them, and then carry on as though nothing had happened. zooming out at the picture like this has given me the opportunity to look at what is essentially a finished painting and made me analyze the whole thing. And these trees in the background are way too forward. They're almost on the same plane as the swans. We've got this sort of light areas around the swans which are confusing. It all looks really, really messy. So sort of making it like a thumbnail, that's sort of the equivalent to me standing back and looking at a painting and thinking, right, I need to tweak it this way or tweak it that way. So I'm now going into over painting to add balance to this picture and try and get a much more unified feel. There's just too many things fighting for attention which needs to be sorted. Also, by now, I have made the decision that I'm only going to put 2 swans in this painting, and I'm not going to put any of the other little birds in either. I just want to focus on them because I thought they look like a couple that are in love. 2 swans that have mated for life, and that's always going to sell, isn't it? It's a seller. So that's the decision I've made. I've made it a much more intimate painting, and I'm working on adding balance. And you can see now I'm using this zooming out technique a lot just to create the effect that I'm after, a balance of colour. And I'm using really muted colours all over it, really. I've got some nice colours going off on the swans, and I'm really knocking those trees back because they were just sort of dominating and I didn't want that. So I'm going to fast forward again, but there's a bit I really want to show you, so I will stop when I get to it because it's really what makes the painting and it's the final touches. So I'm just going to fast forward one more time. So this is where the magic works for me. You see, I've got these little marks, little dots of highlights in the foreground where the lights sort of hit the wet ground, the wet grass, and also sort of marks in the background and on the swans. Now, the trick here is I need to get a sense of perspective. I still want that distant ground way back in the distance, but I want the foreground much closer to you. So the secret is this. You'll notice if you look close that the marks in the foreground, those teals, those yellows, are much brighter and stronger colours, much more saturated. And in the background, I've muted them down. I've made them duller, less bright. I've knocked the luminosity down so that those colours appear further away. They're the same colour. They are exactly the same colour. I've not changed the hue at all. That's the same, but I've changed the luminosity and saturation to make them more muted in the background and bigger. The strokes are bigger, broader strokes, which is kind of contrary to what you normally do. But in the foreground, I've made these little tiny marks of quite strong, vibrant colours. And I continue along that path pretty much until I'm happy with the effect I've got. And I'm just sort of trying different colours. I'm using teals in there, yellows, lime greens and lilacs, really, all to make this really nice soft effect. I've got a lighter colour on the right hand side which is balancing in the background distance, the sort of lighter yellowy green which is balanced off onto the left hand side, and I put a few vertical strokes in and marks as well as some random dashes just to give the impression of that water there. You can see I'm just adding that in now. So what do I think to the pastel brushes in Artset Pro? Well, I know I'm really proud of this piece that I've drawn. I really love it. It's one of my favourites that I've done for quite a while. So from that point of view, they have been a massive success. Do they compete with Procreate and Artrage and Critter? I think they do. I'm very happy with this. Like I say, I'm very happy with it. There's not as many brushes and choices to choose from, but the overall effect, I don't think I could have got any better in any of the other apps. And this is all subjective, really. This is all my opinion of what I think to those brushes. Everything works really smoothly. There's no lag. Even on the really big brushes. I'm working on an A3 size canvas, by the way, 300 dpi, so that's a reasonable size. I'm quite happy with the interface now. I've got used to that. Everything works quite seamlessly. The technology is not getting in the way of the painting, so I would say that they are on a par with all the other apps, but no better. I wouldn't rush out and buy this app for the pastels if you own Artrage, or if you own Procreate, or if you're on a desktop, if you've got Critter. I'm just using those three apps. I know there's lots more, and somebody will probably put in the comments, what about such and such an app? I wouldn't rush it out and buy it because it's no better than any of the others, but it certainly is as good as. So there we are. That is it. That is my painting in pastels in Artset Pro. I really hope you've enjoyed this video as much as I have enjoyed painting it. Thanks for staying with me till the end if you have. Well done. It all helps with the algorithms and things, and it means that I must have made an entertaining video. If you have enjoyed the video, a thumbs up as always is much appreciated, and if you're new to the channel, please consider subscribing, and if you've been visiting me a while and haven't subscribed, please consider subscribing. It helps me out a lot. And don't forget, everybody, keep painting, stay safe and stay sane. Hopefully I'll see you all in the next one. Bye.